I think there are a group of different sort of converging forces. I mean, the first thing to keep in mind is simply the fact that the history majors are dropping along with all the other humanities, and so in some ways it's a much larger problem than something that history is facing. As we look at across the humanities, we're seeing almost all of the different disciplines are dropping at a fairly similar pace. So
is that supposed to be reassuring?
It's not. No, but I think in some ways it provides some context to it in the sense that we all perhaps should be banding together more broadly, and I think that's part of the challenge. And to think more climactically about, and I think most of us know that the STEM disciplines, or when even the president, who's a friend in theory, the outgoing president, who's in theory a friend of our disciplines, is sort of encouraging students to think about careers in more professionally oriented projects, taking majors in that. I think that speaks to the sort of headwinds that we're facing in that broad context. But I think more broadly, there's structural factors that are working against history as well. I mean, when you look, the number of students who are graduating with AP credits has reached an unprecedented level. So it means that a growing number of students are just coming into college already basically placing out, either through APs or through community college credits, through dual enrollment credits. So they're already placing themselves out of even having to take a college level humanities course in many instances. So they're not even getting exposed to the sorts of faculty that they might encourage them to major in history. And so in that sense, I think and when you look at it historically, there's a big drop off in the 70s and 80s that paralleled with the elimination of history from gen ed credits. And so I think in some ways, and then it began to move back up in the late 90s, early 2000s, and that paralleled with a change in the sort of as world history was put back into the gen ed requirements. So again, I think as students get, so really a critical part of the need that we need to work with is simply getting students some exposure to history so that they can experience how great it is, and really how enriching it can be to get in front of to really open their minds to that historical perspective and to see how much deeper it can actually be. I don't think it's nearly as much of a factor as a lot of people think it is, except in the sense that it speaks to the larger climatological issue, which is there's the sense that humanities majors don't make as much money, or in a lot of cases the myth is that humanities majors just don't make any money, that they're all baristas and that sort of thing. I think that myth is one thing that we really need to work strongly against, because all the evidence is clearly in a different direction. We don't make as much as engineers for reasons that are fairly obvious, but we make significantly more than people who don't have a college degree or who only have a minimal level of college. And the debt levels, I mean, I'm working on a study right now that shows that debt levels for humanities majors are actually significantly lower than most of the other disciplines, certainly lower than the average. And so I think that's part of the challenge that we need to sort of push back on a lot of these stories, and I think that'll be a good first step in terms of moving the conversation.
Should we feel in despair, or are there grounds for optimism?
Well, that's a harder question. I mean, it's incredibly worrisome when I see the number of majors dropping as fast as they are. But I say at this meeting, I've heard a number of people say that they've seen enrollments begin to stabilize in their departments in a way that I haven't. I mean, it's been probably about 6-7 years that I've heard people starting to see those enrollments drop. And so as soon as they started to say that, I began to expect that we would see a drop-off in majors for the reasons I said earlier. And so I think if enrollments are beginning to stabilize, then that suggests that perhaps we might have hit the floor and we can start to think about moving that curve in the other direction.
Are there any measures that schools are taking to increase the number of students majoring in history?
Well, I certainly see a number of departments that are doing much more creative things to reach out to students, not both as they're coming in and more creatively sort of explaining to them what the value of a history education can be, and even reaching out into high schools. and speaking to students before they even begin to really make that decision about the value of history teaching. But also, I know a number of programs are beginning to think more creatively about how they do their syllabi. And so that students who come into a history course leave, I mean, right from the beginning, they know that they're not just going to be ingesting content, they're going to be learning how to write better, they're going to learn how to think critically and those sorts of things. And so they have a better sense of what sort of skills they're going to get as they leave the class. And I think that also helps a student feel more reassured about the fact that if they major in history, that they're going to get something that will help them sort of advance their lives, both economically as well as intellectually.
Thank you.